Britain and much of the world is in mourning at the end of a reign that lasted longer than any other in the nation's history. Queen Elizabeth was more famed for more years than anyone else on the planet. Loved by many, she was universally revered. Her reign spanned many decades of unprecedented change and upheaval.
My whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
What was her role? How did she do it? And to what effect? The answer to those questions is partly about her, partly about the monarchy, and very much about us.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
Queen Elizabeth II inherited her position in a very different period of time, but she was just as resolute and splendid as Queen Elizabeth I was, and will go down in history as such.
In a world in which monarchies are not frightfully popular, this one retained its popularity mainly because of her.
Now it's the ITV News at 10.
It was a day many people hoped they would never see. But few who witnessed will ever forget. A day upon which world leaders paid tribute to our global queen, and royal sons and daughters walked in the footsteps of their ancestors as they came face to face with their own destiny. It was a chance for people all over the world to say farewell to a woman whose qualities of character helped make her a global icon. It was done with solemnity, with majesty, a day of great, sorrowful beauty. So, on an extended News at 10 tonight, the last goodbye from royal staff lined up outside Buckingham Palace. A reminder on every mile of the route to Windsor of the enormous joy she brought to millions of people. There to welcome her home, her beloved corgis and the pony she rode into her 90s. The final journey within the walls of the palace she called home. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The crown, the orb and sceptre were removed from the coffin before our late Queen departed the earth as she came into it. Leaving a grieving son to wrestle with the chapter he must now help write in our nation's story.
From Windsor, this is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening from Windsor, where Queen Elizabeth is tonight finally at rest alongside her husband Prince Philip, completing what her son King Charles so aptly called her last great journey. For it truly was that in every sense, from the moment the Queen's coffin was placed gently on the state gun carriage outside Westminster Hall, to when it was lowered from public view into the royal vault at St George's Chapel. We witnessed a spectacle befitting her lifetime of service. It was a day of grand, precise ceremony, as guns fired and Big Ben tolled every minute during the funeral procession which carried the Queen past Buckingham Palace one last time. But it was also full of personal touches, of personal grief for her family and her nation, both of whom were with her every step of the way today, just as she was for them during the 70 years of her reign.
The sound of the Abbey's muffled bell. A moment of perfect stillness, as though the country itself was holding its breath. And then, because happen it must, the Queen left Westminster Hall this morning. For the armed forces, a last act of duty for their commander-in-chief. For her children and grandchildren following, a last act of love for their mother. The massed pipes and drums of the Scottish and Irish regiments leading the procession to the Abbey where Elizabeth was married, crowned, and now mourned. A congregation of royalty, presidents and prime ministers standing for a queen who'd met them all. For closest family, their private grief on public show. Hard for those experienced in the rituals of royal life. For the youngest, Princess Charlotte and Prince George, a daunting test. In the very centre of the Abbey, the Queen's coffin. The country's beating heart stilled.
We come to this house of God, to a place of prayer. Here, where Queen Elizabeth was married and crowned, we gather from across the nation from the Commonwealth, and from the nations of the world, to mourn our loss, to remember her long life of selfless service, and in sure confidence to commit her to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer.
Music echoing down the years, this a hymn sung at the Queen's wedding.
People of loving service are rare in any walk of life. Leaders of loving service are still rarer. And we pray today especially for all her family, grieving as every family at a funeral, including so many families round the world who have themselves lost someone recently. But in this family's case, doing so in the brightest spotlight. Her late Majesty's broadcast during COVID lockdown ended with, "We will meet again." Service in life, hope in death. All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, "We will meet again." Let us commend to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer, the soul of Elizabeth, our late Queen.
The last post before the Abbey fell silent. Raw emotion on the face of the King at our changed national anthem. And this was how the late Queen wanted it to end, her piper turning and walking away as the sound of his lament faded over the Abbey. In loving and devoted memory, Charles R., the card on her wreath reads, "Myrtle from her wedding bouquet and rosemary for remembrance among the flowers," as though anyone here would forget. Under the eyes of the Queen's family, almost every world leader from across the globe, and British Prime Ministers past and present. The greatest show of ceremony this country has put on for 7 decades. Past the cenotaph, flags lowered, and a royal salute. Every beat of this procession planned for decades. The applause of the crowds, something new. Past Buckingham Palace, but no homecoming this. The household staff lined up to say goodbye. And the Queen's great-grandchildren, solemn in their car. At Wellington Arch, the coffin transferred from gun carriage to state hearse for the last leg of the journey to Windsor. This route designed to allow the greatest numbers to come to say their goodbyes. And come, they did. Bicycles abandoned as the procession passed. The Queen's way strewn with flowers. In Windsor's great park, so beloved of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, the procession reassembled. A long walk of pageantry, not just fit for a queen, fit for this queen. Waiting for her coffin at the castle, her adored corgis Mick and Sandy, and her fell pony Emma, who she rode into her 90s. You have to imagine the Queen would have smiled at that. In through the gates of Windsor Castle, and on to St George's Chapel, where the Queen last year mourned her husband, sitting alone. The chapel today filled with family and members of her household, past and present. Memories of the late Duke threaded through the music. This Kentuckian of the departed was played at his funeral, too.
We give special thanks for the life of thy daughter Elizabeth, for the mercy she received from thee, and for the example that through her life of service, love, and faith, she has set before our eyes.
The orb and sceptre removed from the coffin and placed on the altar, the sovereign's power symbolically relinquished. Without the imperial state crown, the coffin looking suddenly bare. The breaking of the Lord Chamberlain's wand, the end of his service to the Queen. At this, the end of her service to us.
It hath pleased Almighty God to take out of this transitory life unto his divine mercy the late, most high, most mighty, and most excellent monarch, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of her other realms and territories, Queen.
The Queen's coffin lowered into the royal vault to be reunited with her late husband. Her promise kept, her duty done. The burden of kingship now falling on her grieving son. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
Well, throughout our coverage since the death of the Queen, we have been joined by Chris, our royal editor, of course, and he is once again here with me tonight. You have an update from the palace this evening.
Yeah, just a brief update, Tom, that in the last half hour, Buckingham Palace has released a new image of the Queen. We can see that here, with the phrase that King Charles used in that speech last week, "May flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." It comes from Hamlet, and we understand that signifies that the burial, the private burial of Queen Elizabeth II has now happened inside the chapel behind us.
I can see why they might have released that still. It is a most beautiful still of her, really seems to capture her brilliantly in a place she loves so much. We said goodbye to the Queen today, but very noticeable in those services, 3 generations of the royal family. So yes. Ultimately, is this a time, do you think, of continuity or of change?
Good question. I mean, I think what we did today, we said goodbye to the Queen in the most spectacular, ceremonial, emotional, moving way. But if you ever needed an example of that famous phrase, "The King is dead, long live the King," well, we had it there in front of us today. It's just little things like the orb and sceptre were taken off the coffin. They will now wait to be handed to King Charles at the time of his accession. It's little things like the Garter King of Arms, the guy, you know, who stood up on the friary court in St James's Palace and says, "We have a new king." Well, there he was today, this afternoon, the same guy as pronouncing the demise of the Queen. So continuity, and that's another reason, of course, why George was there today, because we had a very clear signal of a late Queen, a current king, and 2 future kings. I don't know if I was 9 years old, I want my destiny set out for me in that way, like he had for him. But that's the royal family saying, "Here's the future; it is secure."
Okay, we'll come back to you towards the end of the programme. Now, from Westminster Abbey all the way to Windsor Castle, everywhere the Queen went on her final journey, she was joined by thousands of people lining the route, grasping any vantage point they could to catch a glimpse of the procession, to say goodbye. And when it came to it, and when it did come by, some stood in quiet reflection, others cheered, applauded, or threw flowers, all united by a need to be there, to witness those unique sights and sounds which they could not miss and which they will surely never forget.
At the start of a day the like of which few have seen, a famous thoroughfare made ready. At the edges, those with duty still to do, sometimes lit with gold, but waiting behind the barriers, the people.
Tired, very, very tired. No sleep.
No sleep?
No sleep, no, but worth it, isn't it? Can't miss it, can you?
Bless him, he's travelled from Telford to come down to us in Hertford, and we brought him in, and he's literally just gone to sleep.
He's been awake all night.
Awake all night, he's literally just gone.
I've actually got my grandson's jacket on, and he's 6 feet tall, I'm about 5'2", but it's very thick and it covered all of the...
There were hours of anticipation, and then through the air, came the sound of beautiful voices, the start of the funeral service, broadcast in its entirety here, and the 2-minute silence that started inside the Abbey spread all the way along the road up to the palace.
It was beautiful, loved it.
Felt like you were part of it out here.
Yeah, I do. I did. It's really lovely. It was a lovely Lovely music, lovely service. It's wonderful.
When the procession began, phones were hoisted high in the air, and railings and lampposts and ladders were climbed.
What can you see?
I can see loads of soldiers, and I think I can see the Queen's carriage.
It really was extraordinary, very moving, uplifting, and an extraordinary thing to witness, I think.
Out in London's greener suburbs, the crowd still came to see the cortege through with stories of a long reign.
It brings all the memories back from Nairobi, where I was born, and my mother in 1952 went and waved at the Queen, young Queen.
And then at Windsor, the last long walk, where the people are very close to Journey's End.
Oh, it's just nice to be here at the end, really. I've watched it all the way down from Balmoral on the TV, and I've been into London a few times, so I'm just glad to be here.
The crowd packed into the spaces leading up to the castle. She was a queen they loved, and as dusk fell at the end of this day, they had seen her all the way home. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
Well, Rebecca Barry was inside the walls of Windsor Castle as the funeral procession arrived. Rebecca, a moment of high emotion it must have been for those on both sides of the gates.
Yes, first we saw the royal standard being raised here above Windsor Castle, signalling that the new sovereign was on the estate, and then I witnessed the impact on the people inside the castle as they said goodbye to our late monarch and welcomed the next. I was standing up at St George's Gate, just up from here, as the coffin went past, followed by the king, those drums marking out the beat of his slow footsteps. I was standing next to some members of the royal household who all fell silent. Some of the catering staff bowed their heads, some wiped away tears. Even the police officer on duty gave a salute, and then she started to cry. Beyond the castle walls, 100,000 people came here today to be a part of this, and I think it will be those incredible images of all those people packed onto the long walk which will illustrate to our children's children just how the British public marked and mourned the end of the Second Elizabethan age.
OK, Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. Well, whilst many did make the journey here to Windsor, to London and everywhere in between, millions more watched today's state funeral all across the country, as many of you indeed will have done, in living rooms and in pubs, on giant outdoor screens and on mobile phones. Emotions rose to the surface as people gathered together. 11 days after the Queen died, during which there has been little time to take stock of how the fabric of our nation has altered, the moment had come to say farewell.
Whether watching through the rain in city squares or paying tribute to the Queen from Sunfield stadiums, in every corner of the kingdom she loved, they came to say goodbye. And though you cannot stop time, today a country tried. On the Mersey, busy pubs fell cathedral quiet, heads bowed and glasses raised. It wasn't only the abbeys in Windsor and Westminster that saw ceremony today, and particularly for those who'd served, that mattered.
You could see that the whole world come together, and again, even though we didn't manage to go down there and be a part of that in London, you still felt a part of it, even though we wasn't actually there.
To watch it and like to be with family as well, not on your own, it's all quite sad. So you just want to be with other people.
In Middlesbrough, a still-making town fell silent for its sovereign. Children who just 3 months ago rejoiced at her jubilee, now pin-drop silent. The polished pageantry of the capital a world away. But there's the same respect in every thoughtful gesture here for a woman whose face was as familiar as family.
It was a mum. Just, it hits home, doesn't it, when you lose somebody really close.
She definitely connected with people all over. I've not realised how much a connection was until sort of she's passed away, really.
Outside, a hastily arranged bank holiday saw some streets fall completely still. Schools suspended, shops shut, and seafronts silent. Hard not to think of lockdown and the late Queen's reassurance that we will meet again. But it's hard to believe there will ever be anyone who brings us together like she did. The same generation that crowded around newfangled televisions to cheer her coronation, gathering again to say an almost impossible goodbye. This final chapter, not an easy one to watch, but even here, amongst the sorrow, there were smiles.
It was very, very good, and I wouldn't have liked to have missed it, but I was seeing it now. I loved it. I enjoyed it.
And that's how we've tried to take her death in, sticking close on our sofas, remembering together.
She bridged the gaps where the politicians couldn't, didn't she? She got people together.
You got to love her, and it permeates in you to think about her and with her families and how everyone cares about her, for she cares about people.
One country, 10 days to say goodbye, to understand our Queen is gone, but not the ties that bind us. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
It wasn't just in this country that people came together to watch today's ceremonies. They did so right around the world. She was, after all, not just our Queen, but also head of the Commonwealth. In those nations and in all to which she travelled, she left a lasting impression, her warmth and affection shining through. One reason why so many felt compelled to be part of today's events, wherever they were.
Her monarchy stretched far beyond British shores. So too the pageantry to mark the passing of the Elizabethan era. In Canada, one of the Queen's 15 realms, a service of national commemoration to honour her contribution to the nation. The Queen was the most travelled monarch in history and had visited Canada on 22 occasions. As her funeral drew to a close in Windsor, a 96-gun salute marked every year of her life. In Kenya, where her reign began and the world saw the first pictures of Queen Elizabeth, they watched the images marking the end of her reign, remembering how a young princess became a monarch in their country. In Hong Kong, those who couldn't be part of the London service gathered at the British consulate.
I remember I was at Princess Diana's funeral, I was at the Queen Mother's funeral, and to feel that level of grief and loss, but not to be able to be part of it, makes it harder.
In Australia, where she visited 16 times, her image was cast onto the Sydney Opera House. In the United States, some gathered at dawn to be part of a moment of global significance.
She was such an icon of leadership, of self-sacrifice to her country and people, and a great inspiration.
In Nepal, prayers were said for a monarch who visited the country twice, as candles burned at a shrine to honour the late Queen. In Malta, where the Queen made her first state visit and her last, a gun salute marked her memory as a much-travelled monarch made her final journey. Emma Murphy, News at 10.
While the citizens of the world watch, their leaders descended on London. Kings, queens, emperors and presidents flew in their presence necessitating an unprecedented security operation. But this was no ordinary gathering of world leaders, as the business of politics was put on hold for this moment of mourning.
Never before this morning had so many British police officers been brought together for one event. And through the silence, the sound of the drum beats approached. And this enormous operation, codenamed London Bridge, reached its most frenetic moments. Among the mourners were kings and queens and presidents and prime ministers and people from everywhere in their hundreds of thousands. President Biden arrived with special permission to use his armoured limousine, nicknamed the Beast. And then the buses. Most leaders were told to give up their diplomatic cars to use this unfamiliar form of transport. Of course, these are leaders who normally hold discussions around conference tables. Today they meet on a bus, wearing black. Like at all funerals, some of the guests have history. Britain's friends and acquaintances came, from democracies to dictatorships to everything in between. Whatever their title, the grandeur of the day, of the moment silenced all, politics could wait for now. China sent its vice president. Pleasantries, but little connection. And he sat far from the American president, tucked in, down the aisle, on row 14, the Polish leader in front of him, the Czech leader behind. No wonder she has become known by some as the Queen of the World. That's down in part to the history of a one-time imperial monarch, but it's down to her too, and her book of condolence drew signatures from leaders everywhere.
It's a loss not only to the royal family, it's a loss not only to the UK, it's a loss to all of us, both in the Commonwealth and outside.
There's a world of pressing global issues which they might have discussed under different circumstances. But tonight the normal rules of international diplomacy resume without a unique figure. Rohit Katru, News at 10, Westminster Abbey.
Dotted among the world leaders and dignitaries at Westminster Abbey were members of the public, everyday heroes, one might say, who had been recognised by the Queen for service to their own communities and now given the chance to say a personal thank you to her. Afterwards, they spoke of their pride at being present for this moment of history.
At the heart of this funeral was the Queen's lifetime of service. Fitting then that in the congregation was a privileged few hundred whom she'd recognised for theirs. Among them, Johnson Bihari, whom the Queen awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest award for bravery, following his service in Iraq.
It's the first time I shed a tear. It really sinks in when I hear the national anthem and I have to sing it. Because for almost 22 years, I've been singing the national anthem we know, and now the words change, and that's when I really feel it.
He wore his medal for only the 4th time today, but the service took him back to the day he received it.
It was the scariest day of my life. And she said to me, "You're a very special person. I don't get to do this very often." But I remember how easy it was to communicate with her. And I took that in with me.
Commitment to community as well as country was also recognised with invitations. Pranav and Natalie both received MBEs in the Queen's last birthday honours list. Pranav's for his volunteering work during the pandemic.
Seeing the coffin as up close as I did really brought home the fact that our Queen is no longer. And quite honestly, it was at that point I had a lump in my throat, and actually it brought back feelings of other funerals I've been to, including my own grandfather's funeral.
For Natalie, who's campaigned against knife crime, it was a surreal experience.
You've got President Biden going past, and you've got former prime ministers, and then obviously the royal family, and you're thinking, but I'm just Natalie from Birmingham, but I'm still part of this. But I think that's a real testament to the Queen.
Was there a particular moment which really moved you?
I think it was seeing King Charles and seeing the rest of the royal family, and I think that really sort of got you inside, because you can think they're saying goodbye to their mother, their grandmother, and that moment will always stay with me.
In the procession that followed, May Parsons, on the right here, was among the NHS workers who had the honour of escorting the coffin. She was the nurse who administered the world's first COVID jab and found her participation today an emotional experience.
I think for me it's kind of like a symbol of she is really going, and obviously it's a sad moment, so I couldn't help but cry at that time. I've obviously met her and spoken to her and had that moment with her, so that was obviously a final goodbye.
The images from today will linger long in many of our memories. Those who witnessed them in person are unlikely ever to forget. Ben Chapman, News at 10.
The past, present and future of the royal family was there for all to see at Westminster Abbey today. But whilst King Charles and his son Prince William have had decades to come to terms with the nature of monarchy, the same cannot be said for the young Prince George and Princess Charlotte. They were alongside their parents at today's funeral, performing their duty as royals, but also simply as two children saying goodbye to their beloved great-grandmother.
Prince George and Princess Charlotte arrived at Westminster Abbey this morning knowing they had their own important part to play. They are grieving for their great-grandmother, but are also having to learn what it means to live these private moments in a very public way. 7-year-old Charlotte held onto her mother's hand as her big brother led them inside. It is difficult to imagine a more daunting duty than the one that lay ahead. Walking behind the Queen's coffin, next to their parents, and watched by the world.
They might have felt a bit nervous, also extra upsetting because they had to go in front of the crowd when their great nan's just died. So I think that it's important that kids are involved in the royal family, because some people, they don't even know there were any, they just thought, oh yeah, the Queen. I'm proud of them because they're carrying on with life, and they're not letting anything stop them from carrying on.
And that is something these children will have to get used to. The Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations gave us, and them, a glimpse of what the future will be. Of course, they also have lots of personal memories of the great-grandmother they called Gan Gan. Princess Charlotte wore a brooch that was given to her by the Queen as she and her brother took their places on this most historic of days.
Today was about the past, the present, but also the future, about the line of succession, about continuity. The crown will go on.
But the Queen will no longer be the one wearing it. And for these two children, today was about saying goodbye to their great-grandmother. Chloe Keedy, News at 10.
This is a day, of course, every news organisation has planned for over many years. But however prepared you are, there are still moments that inevitably take you by surprise, like those images of the crown, the orb and the sceptre being removed from the late Queen's coffin. A reminder, we come with nothing, we go with nothing. And as we looked into the eyes of Charles III as the congregation sang God Save the King, it was hard to shake the sense that it gave new truth to that old adage, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Well, finally, today, let's return to a man who, of course, has been making his own preparations in recent years, our royal editor, Chris Shipp. So much expectation, I guess, from this day. What will stick in your memory the most?
Look, I mean, if you were to ask me, was I preparing for today? Yes, all news organisations were. Did I know about the plans? Yes. But then I don't think anything really prepares you for what we saw today, and it's really hard to know what to pick out. Is it the 142 naval ratings pulling that gun carriage? Is it the state funeral service? Is it the crowds on the long walk? Was it that image of the corgis waiting for the return of their owner? For me, I suppose what will immediately come to mind was the moment the coffin passed Buckingham Palace for the last time, because for me that was where the Queen used to stand in moments of national celebration. And just there, Thomas, it went round the corner and up Constitution Hill, and the coffin went past Buckingham Palace for the last time. I mean, that was home, that was office, that was headquarters of the monarchy, and she went past never to return again. Look, people who organise funerals always say that the moment the coffin disappears from view is a very important one, and definitely that happened today. And I think if the Queen wanted to be seen in death as much as she was seen in life, I think we can all agree she definitely did that today.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Well, that is almost it from us here in Windsor, where the Queen was laid to rest here finally. Now, the full stop on 70 years which have brought such change, but where she was always a constant. For each of us, the memories, the moments which stand out will be different. We all have a distinct image in our mind's eye of the Queen, be it the 25-year-old who ascended to the throne or that familiar beaming smile as she sat opposite Paddington Bear. Now she is at rest and the nation looks to the future, but the images we've seen these past 12 days, and indeed during all of the Queen's reign, will echo throughout history. That's it. Good night. And tonight of all nights, thank you for watching.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family, to which we all belong.
To my darling Mama, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you. Thank you for your love and devotion to our family. May flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
Good evening to you. A good deal of fine, dry weather to come in the next few days for many of us. A mixture of patchy cloud and sunny spells and feeling mild given the time of year. Temperatures a little above those you'd expect for the middle of September. With the clearer skies in places tonight, temperatures dip a few degrees, a little chillier come the first stages of tomorrow morning with a few pockets of mist and murk to start the new day. Elsewhere, more cloud, capping the temperatures and staying a touch milder here. And into tomorrow with the cloud wafting around, bright rather than sunny skies for many of us, staying a little dull and damp across the northwest of Scotland. Otherwise a dry day, highs of around about 20 degrees or so through the afternoon. Into the middle of the week, a fine dry day for many once more, a bit more of a breeze across the north and the west, more sunshine in the south and feeling a touch warmer for many.
Good evening, welcome to Granada Reports. Streets fell silent across our region today as people came together to say a final goodbye to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Many shops, schools and businesses were closed as people watched her funeral on television or on big screens in churches, care homes and theatres. Rob Smith reports on how the North West paid its respects to our longest reigning monarch.
Bidding farewell beneath a big screen in a city stopped for a sovereign. Hundreds filled Manchester's Exchange Square to mourn. They were still and sombre.
She had such a big influence on the whole country and the world, so I think it's only right to just pay our respects for that.
I'll take a bit of comfort that I think the love was returned to her that she always showed to us.
Places of worship opened their doors to those seeking comfort on a day of grief. Congregations like here in Lytham feeling a connection to those gathered at the Abbey, hundreds of miles away.
It felt like we were part of the congregation as well, which made it even more special and moving.
The only event in dozens of arts centres and cinemas was the funeral. The Story House in Chester among those trading performance for taking pause.
It's quite strange having my Duke of Edinburgh and my Queen's Scout and both of them no longer with us. So it's quite nice to be able to come together with all these and just pay our respects nicely.
Where communities usually gather were deserted spaces today. Shopping centres and high streets empty, closed out of respect. Some roads saw barely a car as thousands chose to mark the day with loved ones at home. Young fundraisers Reuben and Eleanor Evans-Gillen from Warrington were recognised in the late Queen's birthday honours earlier this year. The twins watched the service with their dad.
It made me very emotional, and it's just very upsetting how a queen that me and Reuben have known for our whole life has sadly just passed away.
I honestly couldn't believe it because she's been reigning as queen for I think 70 years, and now instead of a queen, it's a king, and I can't get over it.
Being old enough to remember a previous king, previous state funerals, didn't make it any easier. Staff stood and sat alongside residents at care home after care home. At one in Salford, 96-year-old Rhoda Rich helped plant a tree in memory of the royal who shared her age. She felt today in a way few others can.
I felt that it was happening to me as well, because we were girls together, we grew up together. I went through everything in the war with her, she was with me, and we were like, I felt like a sister to her, although she didn't know me.
Sounds of memorial and celebration punctuated this day, from bells tolled in tribute to silence observed in public and private. To the new national anthem. A day when thousands who couldn't be in London said their own goodbye here. Rob Smith, ITV News.
Those who could made the journey to London to pay their own personal tributes, with train and coach companies adding extra services. For some, it meant travelling through the night and waiting for hours with no sleep. Lisha McNally caught up with those from our region at Westminster Abbey.
A moment in history marked on the streets of London as the country says goodbye to the Queen. And from every corner of the Northwest, thousands travelled to share her final journey.
We want to go down and see what's going on and pay our respects, and it's something that we can tell our children about when we're older and say, we were there, we seen what happened, and we can tell them firsthand.
We knew if my mum was still here, she would have wanted to go, so we're kind of going to represent our mum as well.
From Cheshire, Lancashire, Greater Manchester and Merseyside, they waited through the cold of the night. Memories made and friendships formed.
I came across the London Bridge, found this group of wonderful people, and we all stood here talking about the Queen and what a great person she was, and how this was a fitting tribute to her.
For Gary, a historian and author from Manchester, it was a moment that couldn't be missed. What does it mean to you to be here for this moment?
Everything, in a word. Yes, you know, it's an end of an era. It's the end of the second Elizabethan era, and it's a huge goodbye to someone who's done so much for us. I was saying to someone before, you know, she is a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother, not just to her own family, but to the country.
What do you think the Queen would make of all of this?
I think she would be very proud, because it's an outpouring of emotion and feeling and respect, and it's nothing less than she deserves for everything that she's done for us.
That outpouring of emotion followed the Queen across Parliament Square and under the soaring archways of Westminster Abbey, where, followed by her family, 2,000 people waited to say their goodbyes.
It was very poignant and a huge privilege to have been able to attend the funeral. And I'd say one of the things that strikes me is that the whole thing was organised so incredibly well. A very solemn, very moving occasion as well. And I thought, I guess other people may have picked different moments. For me, it was the Queen's piper.
The late Queen left Westminster for the final time. She lived 7 decades of service and a lifetime in public view. Tonight, she'll be laid to rest in private as the second Elizabethan age comes to an end. Lisha McNally, ITV News, Westminster.
Manchester-based community peace activist Professor Arimna Bell was honoured by Queen Elizabeth back in 2008. She was awarded an MBE for her anti-gun campaigns, wearing a dress she made herself, and the Queen told her she looked exquisite. She says she found the Queen to be strong and genuine.
For me, I think she has held that role in such a noble way, because it's a role that was bestowed on her, that was given to her, that she had to fulfil, and a true role model of leadership as well, because, you know, she had all those other titles of mother, grandmother. She was also our leader.
And we end tonight looking back at some of the unforgettable occasions when the Queen came to the Northwest. The visits began when she was a princess, attracting crowds wherever she went. This is one of her favourite hymns. The day thou gavest, Lord, is ended. Have a very good night.